In this part, we are going to discuss detail about the theory of Hua acupuncture and the application of Hua acupuncture. I will also continue further to talk about different variations that can enhance treatment outcome in the clinic. So let's begin. First, let's talk about some of the aspects of Hua Chim or Hua acupuncture. Chim, again, is acupuncture in the Korean language. So there are 5 aspects of Hua acupuncture that make it a very unique technique that can be applied in a variety of situations, simply and effectively. So why is Hua Chim acupuncture so simple? Well, because actually you're only inserting an average of 4 to 8 needles. And to be honest, in the clinic, even after inserting one needle, according to the patient's constitution, you should be getting results, effective results, results right away. And that means after inserting the needle, that if there's an area of pain, that area of pain starts to feel better, starts to reside. And then continuing just to basically support your first point insertion. If your first point insertion does not yield any results, it's really important to, one, recheck the person's constitution via the pulse, and two, reinsert the needle, or three, uh, change the angle of the needle slightly without actually taking it out. So the insertion should feel very smooth and should yield results right away. Actually, there is no need to insert more than one point if that one point is very effective and is inserted according to the Constitution. Effectivity. So the needle effect is often immediately detected. So true, if you're just starting out practicing Hua Chim and you don't get an effect from the first needle, if you feel really confident about the patient's constitution or the situation doesn't immediately reveal itself. In other words, if the patient has pain in their shoulder, or neck, or arm, obviously after you place the insertion in, there's ways to check to see if the patient is feeling better. But this patient could be coming in for emotional reasons, for example, suffering from depression, anxiety. In that case, it is hard to determine right away. There are many other cases where it's hard to determine right away, where the pain isn't exactly so concentrated. So, if, for example, this person is suffering from fibromyalgia, if they're suffering from fibromyalgia, obviously there could be pain in all different places and very hard to determine. But often enough, even if they're suffering from psychological issues or fibromyalgia, diffuse pain, you can still, there are ways to determine. This takes some training and obviously some experience. But the patient may often say, that they feel more relaxed, they feel lighter, they feel more grounded, etc. So there are ways, of course, to tell, but generally, if you're just starting out, you may not be able to detect right away, so you might have to insert another needle. But what's really effective, I think, about acupuncture is the fact that the practitioner can check right away. In other words, after inserting the needle, it's a good idea to find a place on the body which might be tight or might originally, before the treatment, feel uncomfortable. So you would check before the insertion and after the insertion that particular spot, whether it be shoulder, whether it be shoulder pain, trapezius muscle tightness, for example, IT band tightness. lack of range of motion, you can check range of motion before and after, but the idea is to check right after inserting the needle to check and see, if there has been any improvement. Precise. Hua Chim acupuncture is quite precise because it's simple. Simplicity allows for more time to fine-tune insertion and get to know the patient's FEC. We're going to talk more about FEC in a moment, but FEC stands for Five Elemental Constitution, according to the Hua Chim method. So if the treatment itself is simple, then you have more time to read in between the lines. Learn about this patient. Eventually, in your practice, you'll come up with patterns that each constitution or five elemental constitution, FEC, will have its own psychological and physiological patterns, and you can pick those up. But with a complicated technique, say, inserting many needles or having to really focus on, the actual implementation of the treatment itself, does not give the practitioner enough time to really get to know the patient. Hua Chim acupuncture is all about getting to know the patient. So all about, really understanding who it is in front of you, what their pulses, the intricate differences in the pulses say when you compare the left and right wrists, what, the tone of voice, how they respond to your questions and conversation. All this is really, really necessary. And also, reading the patient's energy. So reading what their body is saying as you slowly insert the point. So simplicity means focusing on the detail. In other words, just one point. Spend time with it, really take your time with it, and then you really get intimate with the treatment and help the patient further. Hua Chim acupuncture is very practical. It addresses the constitutional imbalance and symptomatic manifestation simultaneously. So when you're focusing on the patient and their constitution, you can help them overcome their symptomatic manifestations as well. Shoulder pain can be overcome by focusing on the constitution, not just focusing on the shoulder pain, because it is the person who is experiencing the shoulder pain. It's not the shoulder pain who is experiencing the shoulder pain, right? It basically is the person. So when you balance the person, you balance their symptoms and help them overcome. So it is a very practical method how to enhance the flow in your patient's body as much as possible. And in doing so, helping their body overcome the symptoms. We're not here to manipulate. We're not here to fix the patient. We're basically, as practitioners, here to enhance and facilitate the healing process by balancing the patient's energies. Hua Chim acupuncture is very efficient, okay? The emphasis is on correct diagnosis and needle insertion technique. So oftentimes when I was training in Korea, learning about the Hua Chim method, my teacher, Dr. Kam, would constantly make us check the pulse again and take a little break and then check it again and then another little break and check it again. Sometimes he would take about 20-30 minutes just checking the pulse. We would have other interns in the room, and they would also compare the pulse. And then we would discuss, if it's 2, 3, 4 of us, we'd discuss what our pulse outcomes were. So that took a lot of time, but it was really, really beneficial to have that experience. And also when you're first starting out with Hua Chim, take your time checking the pulse. If you need a little break, talk to the patient a little bit, and then check it again. I often will go back to the pulse after talking with the patient a little bit just to make absolutely sure that I have the constitution right. So, and also the needle technique. Inserting the needle very slowly, meticulously, and turning it into a sort of meditation. You're meditating when you're inserting that needle. You're breathing, the patient is breathing, and it's a very, very profound experience. And so really learning how to slow down the process. Slow it down and smell the roses, right? So slow it down, really get a feel for what it's like. It is amazing how, once you really focus on where to place that needle and placing it in the right place, just how effective and how appreciative your patient is and how effective it is on the treatment. It really makes a difference. Some of you may ask, so does inserting the point slowly cause more pain, right? Because you want to get past the skin as quick as possible, right? Well, yeah, so when you tap the chimcorn, you want to tap it about 3 times. The first time, you're tapping it very gently, and the first time is to tap it to just get it through the skin. The second time you're tapping it to get a little bit further, and then the third time is usually when the needle tip hits the tube, so it hits the tube tip, so that you can't go any further, and then you fine tune. So yeah, in doing so, if you find the correct position of the needle, there is a great chance that you will be able to reduce the pain associated with it, minimalize it. There are some points on the body which inherently are a little more sensitive if there's more nerve endings there, like the tips of the extremities. But even then, really getting your point location down precisely, it will make a huge difference. The dominant and deficient elements. Returning to the 69th chapter of the Nanjing states, 실자 사기자, 허자 보기모. Basically, if excess, sedate the son. If deficient, sedate the mother. So sedate the son of what? Sedate the mother of what? In Hua acupuncture, we say it is the FEC, the 5 elemental constitution. So the 5 elemental constitution is the element that refers to the element that is most excess, the one that's acting up, the one that's getting in trouble. And therefore, the 69th chapter says, if it's excess, sedate its son. If it's deficient, sedate mother. So what's going on with this element really depends on the FEC. So the FEC is really the focus of treatment, the 5 elemental constitution. Okay. So the FEC does not change. It's an unchanging underlying energetic pattern of each patient. So no matter what this patient goes through in life, their FEC will be like the projector, and what they're going through, the situation, would be like the screen. Okay, the projector does not change, but what it projects onto the screen changes every moment, right? So it's an unchanging underlying energetic pattern. And therefore, when you see a patient, if you get their constitution down, from that point onwards that you can treat this patient no matter what it is that they're going through based on their constitution. You can simply just use the 4-needle or 8-needle technique, or you can go beyond that based on what they're going through in the moment. But even if you're treating this, even if you're treating shoulder pain, you're doing it through the constitution. Even if you're treating knee pain, through the constitution. That means the points are tonified and sedated and chosen based on the constitution, no matter what. The FEC is the che, or internal aspect, and the symptoms are yong, external manifestation. This Che-Yong theory goes back thousands of years in Chinese philosophy, and it basically says that all things have a Che, an internal aspect, and Yong. What we see with our eyes and feel with our fingers is basically the Yong aspect, but we don't see, the underlying meaning or existence behind, or the non-manifest, or the immaterial, metaphysical aspect, is the Che. So the Che is the constitution, and the Yong is the symptoms that each person or constitution manifests. So always treating the Che, and that will help with the Yong. Okay. The focal point of treatment is always going to be the five elemental constitution. Imbalance of the FEC is the source of all illness. And I mean all illness, right? Because if this, for example, is a wood excess person, perhaps the wood itself is causing issues, like if we are talking about liver excess, liver congestion, fatty liver, hepatitis, etc. But we may also see, a myriad of other issues. There might be kidney deficiency, urinary issues. There may be excess fear because of this wood excess, and fears associated with the weak kidney of the wood excess person. So there are many, many different. Lower back pain would be another kidney deficiency scenario of the wood excess patient. So there are many different manifestations of imbalance of the constitution. Each FEC will have both excess qualities and deficient qualities. And knowing the relationship between the five elements helps the practitioner determine excess or deficient. If this is a wood excess, obviously we talked about there will be water deficiency, but there will be fire excess as well. Okay, so it's really important to know all these connections and how they influence this person's psychology and physiology. So, and that brings us to the last point. The FEC influences all thought and behavior. The characteristics of each five elemental constitution. So on this slide, I'm introducing very basic characteristics, distinctions between each of the five elemental constitutions. There are many more distinctions, characteristics of each constitution that I could be discussing here, but these are the basics of the basics. The important here is not to determine the five elemental constitution in Hua Chim or Hua Acupuncture via personality or physiology. It is important in the Hua Chim method to distinguish the constitution via the pulse. The pulse is really the core diagnostic tool in Hua acupuncture. Okay, so basically these are these characteristics that I'm about to discuss could change. Even though somebody is a wood excess, they may experience metal, physiological, or psychological characteristics. So these characteristics could be fleeting, but the pulse never lies. It always gives you the constitution of the person. Now, if this particular person either has a really weak pulse, or if they've been amputated, if they're an amputee and you cannot check or compare the pulses, yes, going by psychological and physiological aspects of the patient can be extremely important. But in most cases, 95% or higher, you really need to focus mainly on the pulse. These characteristics are also helpful ways to distinguish the constitution, but they aren't in Hua acupuncture, they aren't nearly as significant as the pulse. But let's take a look at them because there are definitely ways to distinguish the constitution via this method, But I would recommend that when you practice, that you also, after checking the pulse, really focusing on the pulse, come up with your own distinctions of each constitution, because each one of us could contribute to understanding the constitutions a little bit differently based on our focus. These are characteristics that I came up with in my own practice. So here we go. Wood FECs. The balanced wood FEC has strong tendons. Imbalanced this should say physiological tendencies, are tightness and inflamed tendons. So the imbalanced wood FEC will tend to have tendons that retract. So if you look at their feet, you'll see that the toes kind of retract towards proximally towards the ankle. And also they may be prone to issues, tendinitis, for example, and tightness of the tendons and lack range of motion. So really important for the wood excess to stretch their body, stretch their limbs as much as possible, as frequently as possible. Fire excess. The balanced fire excess will be resistant to cold. The imbalanced fire excess will be prone to heat disorders, fever, inflammation, histamine, sinusitis, that type of scenario. The balanced earth excess will have a smooth digestive system, but imbalanced, they will experience digestive disorders such as bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea. They may suffer, they're probably slightly more prone, I would say, than the other body types to experience diabetes. The metal excess, balanced, they would have very strong lungs. Imbalanced, they will experience respiratory issues. And this respiratory issue is not due to deficiency of the lung, it's due to congestion. So we're talking phlegm accumulation, inflammation of the lung tissue, etc. Water FEC. The water FEC will have I said flexibility, but that would be more of a psychological trait here. Healthy water metabolism. Imbalanced physiological trait would be to experience weight gain and water metabolic issues. The imbalanced water excess is often overweight. And it might not just be issues with water retention, although that's pretty common. It could also be fatty tissue, etc. Now, don't forget that when we're talking about the 5 elements, and we'll also discuss this further, that water excess is also contributing to wood excess. So the water excess may also have wood liver related congestion issues. And this is actually really common in the clinic to have a water excess with also a wood or liver excess scenario contributing to symptoms such as abdominal distension, fatty liver, liver enzyme elevation, etc. Psychological characteristics of each FEC. So the wood FEC tends to have a really powerful focus. If you think of wood in nature, its focus is to grow towards the sun, right? And anything in its way, it will, in many cases, if you think of trees, find its way around. If you've ever seen the sun block a tree, you know what or if you ever seen something block the sun from hitting a tree, you'll know what I'm talking about. The tree will somehow find its way either around what it is that's blocking it and still grow upwards, or basically grow in a way where it can actually get some sunlight. So a tree is, the trunk is intending to be a straight line from the ground to the sun, but or towards the sun, but occasionally be quite twisted. However, still trying to grow in that trajectory. This is what's powerful about wood, and psychologically, wood types tend to be like a tree. They will have a focus, they have a goal in mind, and really try to get to that goal through the straightest line possible. And the balanced wood can really focus on detail and enhance the outcome based on this detail. The imbalanced wood will be hyper-focused and be prone to frustration. It's really common in the clinic to have a wood element who is extremely stressed because they feel that they are not doing enough or they cannot accomplish their goal. And they keep trying and trying. Also, when it comes to physiological issues, the wood excess tends to worry more about their issues than the other body types do because they want to overcome and accomplish and strive really hard to do so. They tend to be more ambitious than the other types, and they also tend to be more frustrated. The fire FEC. The fire FEC, when balanced, is free-spirited, like fire. If you think of fire, it's very bright and it can travel in all directions. The fire FEC, when balanced, tends to be adventurous. They also tend to take risks, but within reason if they are balanced. Um, Fun loving. The fire FEC likes to enjoy themselves, enjoy their life, and also tend to be like a beacon for others going through hard times. The imbalanced fire FEC would be prone to rage, anger. Um, they would also push themselves to the point of burning themselves out. It's really common for the fire to burn in all directions at once when they are imbalanced and basically cause an intense amount of fatigue where they burn their fire of life out sometimes. So you can still see in this patient, lots of um, uh, light and possibly positive thinking, but at the same time just extremely fatigued. And water controls fire, so you would constantly see if this is a fire excess. And imbalance, kidney deficiency. So kidney is water, right? And there's not enough water in this patient, so the skin tends to be dry. They tend to have what you may refer to as a kidney voice, which is kind of like a low guttural scratchy voice, but yet when you see them, they tend to look like they'd be energetic, but they're not. The Earth FEC. The balanced Earth FEC is calm and probably the calmest of all the body types when they are balanced. They tend to be really down to earth and easy to speak to, carry on a conversation with, tend to have a gentle voice, and tend towards meditation and more yin sort of related exercises that do them well. However, if there's imbalance of the earth FEC, you'll see this calmness taken to the extreme, where there'll be complacency, laziness, lack of desire to interact with others, to grow, to expand their horizons. This is common amongst the imbalanced Earth FECs. The balanced metal FEC tends to be quite sympathetic, empathetic, caring, understanding, and also like you can think of metal as an element, right? You can sharpen metal. And so this type of metal element person, balanced metal element, can be very sharp, step up to the plate when they need to, be able to make very quick and adequate decisions, and also become quite successful with their ability to work with others, to sympathize again for them, to make them feel good about themselves. The imbalanced metal element, remember the lungs are associated with sorrow, right? So depression, the imbalanced metal excess FEC is prone more so than the other types towards depression. And this depression is both physiological and psychological. On the physiological side, the body feels like it is a weight and cannot move. Um, from the practitioner's point of view, the tissues of the metal excess would be really hard. Sometimes when inserting the needle might actually bend even before it makes its way past the skin. Joints are extremely stiff. And emotional depression is the lack of desire to move and to interact. There's extreme fatigue and there's extreme sadness. The water FEC, balanced psychological tendency of the water FEC is strong willpower. If you recall, the kidneys are associated with willpower. And so also the kidneys associated with water. So the balanced water FEC will have a strong willpower. Now this willpower is a little different than focus. So the wood excess would focus on, say, an object or a goal at hand. The water will simply focus more on just moving forward, one step at a time. Wood likes to get there very quickly. Water takes its time. So if you think about water in nature, water is very soft, right, and very gentle, and can fill any, shape a vessel that it's poured into. But if you can think about how water can shape rocks in the ocean, in a river, it's that constant flow that slowly but surely eats away at the rock, right? And this is why in Chinese philosophy they associate willpower with water, because it just keeps going and going and going. Imbalanced psychological tendency of water FECs is fear. Now, also, a kidney is also associated with fear. So if the kidney water is not in balance, fear, fright, anxiety, phobias, for example, are all associated with the water when it is imbalanced. The characteristics of each FEC, starting with the earth type. So if we look at Dwayne Johnson, Dwayne Johnson is a big guy, right? The Rock. He's built like a rock. He's huge, but at the same time, if you look at him being an earth type, remember how we talked about the earth type tend to be the most down to earth, kind, and soft-natured people? Well, Dwayne Johnson, when you look at him, he doesn't, even though he's a big guy, he does not look intimidated. He does not look intimidating. He looks kind and sweet and down to earth and gentle at the same time, even though he's a big guy. And I think that's probably one of the aspects that make him so popular and so liked. And if you listen to any of his videos, also you'll see that he is, at least he comes across being quite compassionate and gentle. The other things to note is with the Earth FEC, the sort of roundish, sort of Earth-looking features. Also with Earth FEC, occasionally you'll see like Dwayne Johnson, a thicker neck. The other thing here on the right side, we see, Bob Ross. Now, I mean, talk about kindness and compassion and gentleness. Don't you just basically want to hug him? I mean, he's just looks like a very sweet, down-to-earth, easy to speak to and be with type of person. Even the raccoons like to hang out with him. The metal types have sort of a hard kind of tight and difficult to penetrate appearance to them, as you can see in both of these pictures here. Um, the metal type tend to look kind of tough and strong. Even if they are not Bruce Lee, and they don't work out every day, they still have that tendency. The metal type often have this stern sort of charismatic, if not confident look about them. Their features tend to look a little on the sharp side versus on the soft side, like especially the water type. The metal type, you may notice, has sort of like a thick eyebrow, or more pronounced bone around the eyebrows. Now, this doesn't have to be all the metal types. Again, these are just general characteristics that I'm sharing with you. But this tends to be pretty common amongst the metal types. The water types tend to have roundish and sort of softish features. They tend to look happy and joyful, kind of happy-go-lucky type. If you look at Shaquille O'Neal, just kind of radiate this joy or happiness appearance. Again, the roundish features is very peculiar and unique for the water type. Perhaps other body types, if they do gain some weight, may also look a little roundish at the edges. But this isn't exactly a cut in stone distinction, but generally speaking, roundish, kind of joyful, kind of relaxed, happy-go-lucky appearance. Much unlike the wood type, which is very different than the water type in their appearance. They tend to look more intense, more focused, stern, and also have a sort of piercing gaze to them, their eyes, and they're very much, as we discussed before, focused on the camera when they're getting a picture taken, or focused on an object at hand or a goal or something that is right in front of them, or they are focused right in front of them on. I often use the metaphor of a millipede when it comes to the wood type because if they focus and move forward and not get hyper-focused, they can achieve so much. But a lot of the time, the wood type is kind of like a millipede trying to determine which leg to move forward first. If the millipede does not think about it, they move, right? If they think about it, one can only imagine how difficult it would be to determine which one of their 100 little legs they have to move first. So the wood type often gets stuck in their own thoughts and patterns. They tend to be very sensitive, and if you look at the pictures we see here, you can tell intense, maybe a little on the sensitive side, and quite focused. In both of these pictures, the picture on the left and the right, you can also see some pretty pronounced facial features, the cheekbones, the chin. This is also quite common with the wood type. Also, they tend to have a narrower face or head, so tends to be, if you measure the distance from ear to ear, less distance in general compared to the other body types. So this is the wood type. The fire type, just like fire tends to flare outwards, you can kind of see that even without getting to know these two, almost immediately you can see some personality just sort of flaring outwards. And so this is the characteristic of fire. Fire is the brightest, most light of all the constitutions. And so it's very easy, or shall I say easier, for them to basically just express themselves to the world. But this can leave them exhausted after they have bursted out their energies. And so the fire types tend to tell it like it is. They tend to express their opinion strongly. Whether or not it affects others is another story. Fire types tend to, not always, but in the Western Hemisphere, fire types have reddish hair, or red hair, or have pale and reddish complexion. That's kind of common with the fire types, but again, not all across the board. These are just general characteristics that I'm sharing with you. The pulse is more important than anything else to determine the body type. The other thing to look at is that in these two examples, you can see these fire types look pretty energetic, pretty radiant in their appearance, even if they may be suffering from fatigue, if they become or have exuberated way too much of their radiance. Here's a little bit more about each constitution, the characteristics and the aspects of each constitution that I've noted in the clinic. I am not looking for these characteristics in determining the body type, but these characteristics could help confirm what I am feeling in the pulse. Again, I use these characteristics to confirm what I'm feeling in the pulse. So when I'm checking the pulse, my mind is as empty and as simply focused as possible. All I'm trying to do is compare the pulses. If I've already determined which body type this is from the characteristics, I can get myself in trouble, because if this is a very radiant fire excess looking person, but I check the pulse and it's a water excess, well, I would have to go by the pulse. But sometimes if I'm very positive that this is a fire excess person, then I may mistreat them and should have treated them as a water excess. So it's really important to start with an empty mind, start emptying your mind and relaxing, and store away any judgment. Put any judgment that you may have about this particular patient aside until after the pulse. Okay, so the wood excess. The wood excess person tends to be excessively strict with themselves and others. His flesh is usually thin, but feels hard when palpated, and his tendons appear raised as if they pull excessively from his bones. He has a tendency to set high standards, but is particularly sensitive to stress and lack of accomplishment. He is the chronic worrier who fruitlessly attempts to find a source for his pain, illness, and suffering. They will be the ones who ask the practitioner why. Why? Why do I feel this way? What is the source? And even if they get their questions answered, they have a tendency to continue to ask the same questions. They may also focus very hard on what the practitioner is saying, so the practitioner has to explain further in more detail about what it is they have explained. The wood excess prefers to focus on one thing at a time and is easily overwhelmed. Fire excess. The fire excess individual is straightforward and hasty in their speech and actions. They tend to offend others with their opinions sometimes. With a sparkle in her eye, she commonly radiates passion and abundance. When burnt out, on the contrary, she is left fatigued and lifeless. With qi that easily changes course and rarely lingers, she responds quickly to acupuncture treatment. This is a really wonderful thing about having a fire excess patient, is that they respond very quickly. But maintaining this is another story. She is prone to either false or true heat issues such as hot flushes, burning sensation of the eyes and face, sudden bouts of anger, inflammation, fever, etc. All due to heat. The earth excess is down to earth and adapts easily to the acupuncture treatment process. But unlike a fire excess individual, her chi is heavily anchored and difficult to manipulate. This is earth we're talking about, and that's why I came up with the word anchor, okay? She's prone to digestive issues such as metabolic disorders, pancreatitis, gallstones, and diabetes. Unlike the wood excess individual, she rarely complains of stress and refrains from setting lofty goals. The calm and balanced looking earth excess makes it easy to overlook potentially acute symptoms. Because they're calm, because they don't complain, because they don't worry as much as the other types, it is hard to sort of get to the core of what the earth excess, the body and the mind really need. And it's not just hard for the patient to express themselves that way. It's hard to actually, treatment-wise, and even with acupuncture and herbs, really get to the core, because the mind and the body are so connected. So clarification is very difficult for the earth excess, whereas for the wood excess, too much clarification, too much focus is the challenge in many cases. Metal excess. His flesh is thick and hard, occasionally causing the acupuncture needles to bend when inserted. Unlike the wood excess individual, he is mild-tempered and easygoing. Yet this can be a reflection of armor that conceals internalized tension that even he has difficulty perceiving. Metal excess individuals are commonly faced with neck, shoulder, and arm pain along the lung channel. Remember, lung is associated with metal, and or large intestine meridians, because the large intestine is the yang correlate of the lungs. Keep in mind that these symptoms can also be experienced by other FECs too. So the metal excess is probably the most difficult to really differentiate between the five elements because they can exhibit more so than others aspects of other element too. They can kind of be towards, it's easy to confuse the metal excess with the water element, sometimes with the earth element, not so much with the wood or fire, but definitely with earth and wood, because they may have a sort of roundish features, they may be down to earth, happy-go-lucky, kind of joy-loving, or they may be a kind of more, their skin may be so tight that their features may become more pronounced, like their eyebrows, they may look a little more stern. So there are issues that, or aspects that may confuse the practitioner. The metal excess pulse, however, is the simplest of all the five elements, because you only have to compare the Chun and Guan positions, which we'll talk about a little bit. The water excess. Her flesh is soft and thick, easily yielding to pressure. Okay. As water assumes the shape of its surroundings, the water excess individual easily adapts to the treatment process. She is the type of patient who returns consistently we're talking about returns to the clinic consistently and isn't preoccupied with the treatment outcome. As a matter of fact, lots of water excess really are at the clinic to just interact and fill in the space. Remember, we talked about water fills in the space of the vessel that it's poured into. While there are water excess individuals who are heavy set and have roundish features, others are thin but still maintain soft and roundish features. There is your water excess person. So until now, we talked a lot more about the five elemental constitution and the fact that the five elemental constitution is the excess element. In other words, a wood five elemental constitution would be a wood excess person or a wood excess element person. But along with excesses always comes deficiencies. And when treating your client, it's always really important to keep in mind that if there is going to be excess, there will definitely be deficiency. And both need to be treated in each, no matter what, in each treatment. You're going to be using points to treat excess and points to treat deficiency. In Hua acupuncture in general, the treatment approach starts with tonification, so treating the deficient element. So if wood is excess, using kidney 10, the water point on the water channel, tonify that point to treat the deficiency first. But in the clinic, not only do you want to treat the deficiency first, sometimes you do want to get right to the excess. So with a wood excess person, if the wood is extensively causing issues and needs to be addressed right away, you can use sedation of the wood point on the wood channel, which would be liver 1. So, take into account each situation and see, is this particular person very excess in nature, in their character, in their personality or the physiology? Then you want to probably sedate the excess first. Is this person quite deficient in nature, personality characteristics? Then you probably want to start with a point to tonify. But let's talk about the deficient element. So if we say that this particular individual in front of us is a wood FEC based on their pulse and perhaps some supporting characteristics, we would say that the dominant element or the excess element, we can say it's the dominant element here, which is controlled by the deficient element, is wood, okay, liver. So the deficient element or the controller element is going to be metal, right? So in Hua acupuncture, we would say that the wood FEC is a wood excess metal deficient constitution. For the fire FEC, the dominant element would be fire the heart, right? For the deficient element, it would be water or the kidneys. For the earth, the dominant element is earth and spleen organ. Deficient controller element is wood, and wood is associated with the liver. For the metal FEC, we have, the dominant element would obviously be metal if we take this pattern, right? Metal is associated with the lungs, so the lungs would be the excess channel. Deficiency would be fire and the heart channel or the heart organ, because the heart controls the metal. Water, so dominant water FEC, dominant element is going to be water, and the dominant channel and organ is going to be the kidneys. And since the earth controls water, the earth will be deficient, and the deficient channel and organ would be the spleen. Let's read this paragraph below because it's really important and significant in Hua acupuncture to know the relationship between the excess and deficient elements. When balanced, the exchange of qi between the dominant or excess and deficient elements contribute to the overall health of each FEC. When balanced, excesses and deficiencies don't show up as symptoms, but imbalance will result in illness. Actually, these elements rarely get along, okay? In reality, these elements don't really get along. Since the dominant element is prone to excess and rebellion from everyday stress, trauma, and or fatigue, the imbalanced dominant element often rebels against the controller element, giving rise to both symptomatic excess and deficiencies in the body. Imbalance of wood, for example, which is the dominant element, be the wood FEC in this case, commonly instigates excessive anger or wood excess, and shortness of breath because metal controls wood. Fire imbalance if the fire is the FEC or the dominant element, is frequently the culprit behind anxiety, fire excess, and frequent urination. Why? Because urination is associated with the kidneys, and this is water deficiency in a fire excess scenario. The water controls fire. Imbalance of earth element, if earth was the FEC or dominant element, easily triggers abdominal fullness. This is due to earth excess, and liver malfunction because the wood controls the earth. Metal imbalance, metal FECs regularly produce phlegm-related disorders due to metal excess, and heart distress because the fire controls the metal. Lastly, imbalance of water element, water FEC, dampers water metabolism due to water excess, and causes internal phlegm accumulation because of spleen deficiency, spleen Qi deficiency, and the earth controls water. Okay, so you can see these connections here. Both excess and deficiency can occur at the same time in any situation. Now that we've talked about both excess and deficient elements and organs, we have one more topic left over to discuss. This is the neutral element. Recall how we talked about the 5 elements as a 2- or 3-dimensional structure where you have the 4 manifestations, the sa sang, and the one in the center, which is the Taiji. Remember? So when we talk about 5 elements, we're really not saying that there are 5 elements in a row constantly influencing each other or causing manifestation of characteristics. We're basically saying that one of those 5 is always going to be in the center, and that center element is going to be called the neutral element in Hua acupuncture. So what is this neutral element? It's an element which is neither excess or deficient, but has a strong influence on the activity of the other elements. So for example, the wood excess person, for the wood FEC, the neutral element will be the earth, okay? For the fire, neutral element would be metal lungs, lungs being the organ associated with the metal. For the earth, the neutral element is going to be water and kidney for a kidney organ. And for metal, the neutral element is going to be wood and liver organ. And for water, the neutral element is going to be fire or the heart organ or channel. Another way to illustrate this is the Che-Yong relationship, okay? The relationship between manifestation or Yong and non-manifestation, Che, is a common topic throughout the history of Chinese and Korean philosophy. Che translates roughly as internal aspect or latent nature, while Yang is the external aspect or manifest nature. It's a bit easier to describe these neutral elements and the role they play using diagrams, and so we're going to discuss this using diagrams, and then you can see why the controlled element is the one that winds up being the neutral element when it comes to each FEC. So for example, wood controls earth, earth being the neutral element. Fire controls metal, fire being the neutral element. Okay, so we're going to talk about this in just a moment. Let's start with wood, okay? So the wood element, if the wood is excess, okay, its mother, water, is going to be deficient, okay? And water controls fire. But since water is deficient, fire is going to be excess, okay? And fire controls metal. And since fire is excess, metal is going to be deficient. And the deficiency of metal, of course, cannot control this excess of wood. Well, if wood is excess here, right, this is wood FEC, for example, then yes, we can say that the earth is going to be deficient. But if the earth was deficient, then technically what it controls, water, should be excess, shouldn't it? because if the earth is deficient, then water has the opportunity to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. But if the water did this, this would not be a wood excess situation. Wood is drawing from its mom, okay? That's what makes it so excess, is that it keeps drawing, drawing, and drawing from mama. So we say that earth then is the neutral element. It's both deficient, but also excess. Excess in the ability to control water, but deficient in the fact that wood, FEC, is controlling it and overbearing its energy on its energy. So it's both excess and deficient, neither excess and deficient. The actual fact is that Earth is in the center, as you can see here on the right. And this is why it is not a direct participant in wood, fire, metal, and water scenario. It's actually in the center. So whatever happens to wood, fire, earth, and metal are definitely affecting Earth, but Earth is in the center. Okay, so it's not a yang, it's not directly participating outside. The sequence of organ excess and deficiency. So when an organ becomes excess, there are several different pathways that unfold. And so here I'm going to discuss what does it mean when an organ is excess? What happens when that organ is excess? And so yeah, when we talk about this pattern, it's basically a sequence of events that occur along the generating and controlling cycle. Remember we talked about pre-heaven and post-heaven, that they exist simultaneously. The underlying sort of che is the generating cycle, and the yang is the controlling cycle. They exist simultaneously. And so we also see this sort of two-dimensional scenario happening with the excess elements or the element that is dominant. So let's take a look first at wood. If wood is the dominant element, what's going to happen? Well, wood is going to take from its mother, water. And this instigates basically the excess of its sun element, fire. Why does this happen? Because wood controls fire, right? And if water is deficient, fire is left uncontrolled. Therefore, in a wood excess situation, wood FEC, the fire element will also be excess. What happens then? Well, the sun element tends to overact on the controlled element. So in this case, in wood excess, fire overacts on metal and along the controlling cycle again, right? And so these three elements are basically the yang effect of what happens when wood is excess. There is, however, a che in every situation, and in this situation, it's going to be earth. Earth is basically the che of wood excess, meaning that it is neither excess or deficient. Why? Because wood controls earth, which would theoretically make earth deficient, right? But water is also deficient, and that would give earth the reins and the ability, the power to control it, right? So that would make earth excess, because the only way, if Earth was participating, that water could be deficient is that Earth would be overacting on it. So Earth is not a direct participant, however, it is an internal, non-manifest participant of the wood excess person. Let's take a look at fire, okay? So fire takes, if it's excess, it takes from its mom wood. And then wood cannot control earth, so earth becomes excess too. So the sun of fire is also excess in a fire FEC or fire dominant situation. Then the sun element then overacts on water in this case. Earth controls water. Metal would be the neutral element because fire basically controls metal, right? So that would make metal deficient. But metal controls wood, and wood is deficient. So that would make metal neither excess nor deficient because it's the Che element. In the metal FEC, it takes from its mother earth, and therefore, since earth is deficient, it can no longer control the sun of metal, which is water, right? And so water then basically, the sun of metal basically overacts on fire, making fire weak. Wood in this case is the neutral element, neither excess nor deficient. Earth. When earth is the FEC or the dominant element, it takes from its mother fire. Since fire can no longer control metal, metal becomes excess. If metal becomes excess, it will be able to, it will actually over control wood, okay? So wood becomes deficient in an earth FEC. And water is neither excess nor deficient. Water FEC or water dominance or water excess. You can refer to this in three different ways: excess, dominance, or FEC. It takes from its mom metal when it's excess, and if metal is deficient, it cannot control wood. Wood becomes excess. If wood is excess, it overbears on the earth, and earth is deficient. Fire in a water FEC is the neutral element. We will discuss a little later how just because an element is neutral does not mean that we cannot address it. For example, in a wood excess situation, you can definitely use earth points. However, these earth points are utilized via the spousal relationship, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So because wood and earth have a spousal relationship, so yeah, we'll discuss that in later on in the lecture. So where does this sequence come in handy? Well, several different ways of looking at this. For the standard 4-needle technique with wood excess, you can follow the sequence. For example, you can sedate liver 1 as your first treatment, since that is the dominant element. And then you can tonify kidney 10, which is, these are horary points, obviously. Kidney 10 would be the water point on the water channel. And then you could, next you can sedate heart 8, which is the fire point on the fire channel. And lastly, tonify lung 8, which is the metal point on the metal channel. So this could be the standard general sequence of treating according to Hua acupuncture. It doesn't have to go along with this sequence, and I'll give you a few examples. For example, if this particular wood excess patient is very deficient in water, for example, kidney deficient, you may want to start with tonifying kidney 10. That may all you want to do, because this person might be significantly deficient. This person, wood excess, may also exhibit heat signs and symptoms, so you may want to go straight for heart 8. So even though the standard approach would be to sedate liver 1, tonify kidney 10, sedate heart 8, tonify lung 8, you could break away from that sequence depending on the situation and the person in front of you. But if you're just starting to use Hua acupuncture, you may want to stick to the standard for needle approach and sequence of insertion. Here we have a review of the sequence of Organexis and Deficiency. I know that some of you might be kinesthetic learners like myself who really need diagrams to sort of get familiar with this idea of excesses and deficiencies. So let's look at the wood excess. Again, the red would indicate the excess organ, the blue would indicate deficient organs, and then the lighter shade of blue would be the neutral organ. If wood is excess, so let's take a look here. If wood is excess, it's going to take from its mom, okay? And water, if it's deficient, it cannot control fire, right? And if fire is not controlled, it will be excess. That's why in a wood excess, we will have fire excess too, okay? Fire is now excess, and it's going to overbear on metal, making metal deficient, and metal cannot control wood. The earth is neither excess or deficient. Why? Because and it is considered both excess and deficient. Why? Because theoretically, if wood is excess, it will overbear on earth. However, water is deficient here, and if water is deficient, then earth can basically grow, since it basically is relatively stronger than the element that it controls. So if we look at the diagram on the right here, you'll see Earth is in the middle. It's the Che. It is the non-manifest quality or characteristic of the wood excess scenario. In fire excess, we also have earth excess. Why? Let's take a look. Because when fire is excess, okay, it takes from its mama, and its mama is wood. If wood is deficient, it cannot control earth. This is what makes earth excess. And if earth is excess, it is going to overbear on water, since earth controls water, and that will make water deficient. And that would make fire excess again, right? Fire is what controls metal, okay? And so technically metal should be deficient. However, wood in this case is what metal controls, and wood is deficient. So that would give metal the chance to grow. However, metal in this case is considered the Che, or the neutral element, because it is neither excess or deficient, and both excess and deficient. Therefore, we place metal in the middle, the monkey in the middle, okay, who doesn't participate directly with the affairs of the other organs in this case. With earth excess, metal will be excess too. Why? Because, let's take a look. When earth is excess, it takes from its mother, fire, okay? If that makes fire deficient. If fire is deficient, it cannot control metal, and that gives metal a chance to grow, okay? Metal controls wood. If metal is excess, it's going to reduce wood further. And of course, wood cannot control earth because earth is excess, FEC. Earth theoretically should make water deficient as it overbears on water. However, water controls fire, and fire is deficient, particularly deficient in this case, giving water the chance to over-control and overbear. So therefore, water is considered both excess and deficient, and is the monkey in the middle, Che element. Metal excess. So if metal is excess, then that means that it actually takes from its mother, Earth. If Mother Earth is drawn dry by metal, then it can no longer control water. And this is why metal and water are excess in a metal excess situation. Now, if water cannot be controlled, it winds up becoming quite excess and then will over control fire. So it will be overbearing on fire, which makes fire deficient. Fire cannot control metal, hence metal is excess. Wood is the neutral element. It is both excess and deficient. Why? Because if metal is excess, then wood should technically be deficient, right? But if wood was deficient, then earth would be excess, see, because wood controls earth. However, earth in this situation is the most deficient element because metal is drawing from it. Therefore, wood is considered the neutral element, the element in the middle. Lastly, we have water excess, water FEC, or water dominance. If water is excess, that means it's going to be drawing from its mom, metal, okay? Which makes metal extremely deficient. Metal can no longer control wood, so wood becomes excess. Therefore, in a water excess or FEC scenario, wood will also be excess. Wood is then overbearing on metal, okay? And wood is overbearing on earth. Earth can no longer control water. So water becomes more and more excess. So this is our scenario for water excess. Fire is both excess and deficient, right? If water overbears on fire, over controls fire, fire will be deficient. But fire controls metal, and metal here is super deficient. So that would give fire a chance to over control. Hence, it is both excess and deficient. Therefore, we say that fire is in the center. It is the neutral element in the water excess scenario.